So as far back as I can remember, my family and I always attended church. We didn't just go on Sundays. It was a central part of our lives, and we were there really all the time. We went to Thursday night services. I was really involved in a lot of our ministries. I sang in our choir, our worship team, and every summer my family and I went to Vacation Bible School, which is kind of like a summer camp for church, and you learn about God. You do a lot of activities and arts and crafts and whatnot. So I vividly recall when I asked Jesus to be my Lord and Savior when I was just a little girl in Sunday school, and at the time, my decision was mostly driven out of fear. I desperately wanted to avoid hell, which I had been taught about. But later in life, I developed my faith, and around 11 years old, I was baptized. So throughout my life, I've always believed in God, and growing up, church was really a refuge for me. It was a safe space. My dad, who was also really involved in the church, unfortunately was often a different person at home. He was both physically and verbally abusive to my mom and my sister and I. And I just remember growing up with police visits to our home, and it was just really hard to handle when he would lose control. At the same time, my mom was really, really emotional often, and my older brother had been killed in a shooting when my sister and I were really little. So I just remember having long bouts where she was just really sad and emotional, and she constantly worried about my sister and I. So on the outside, we looked like the perfect family and looked really wholesome, but on the inside, that wasn't really the reality of our home. And while the church was a refuge and a safe space for me, it wasn't really somewhere where I could share what was going on. I didn't really feel comfortable sharing what was going on in my house. So I kind of learned at a young age to live this double life, and just keeping the shame and the secrecy really was something that I wrestled with for most of my life.
So growing up in our household, we didn't really go to church too much. We would go on Christmas and Easter, and I don't really remember too many of those services. But in the summertime, our church had Vacation Bible School, so I would go there every summer, and the kids there really had a big impact on my life. And I had one friend specifically named Julian, who every year he would remember me, and he had a really big impact on my life, and just continues to have that impact just in the way he loves people and loves Jesus. And side note, Jocelyn and I went to VBS together all growing up, but we never knew each other. And as I got a little bit older, my parents got a divorce, and that made me upset and moderately depressed, and I began to wonder really why we were here and really what my purpose in life was. And then between the ages of like 12 to 14, I began to explore just different spiritual ideas based off of what me and some of the other kids were talking about in school. And they had some different books that talked about like developing relationships with like spiritual beings and all this other stuff. And at that time, it was really interesting to me. I began to talk to, who I thought was God at the time, and try to, develop my own ideas of who He was and what He wanted for me. And I would ask for, or I believed that if He did love me, He would give me a special place, or enlighten me with something. And those ideas were just reinforced when I would have conversations with kids at school, and just the things that we were getting into. And eventually around the ages of 13 to 15, I began to go to our Friday night youth group. And a lot of things are fuzzy around that time, just the timeline of things. There were so many things going on in life, and I was a teenager, so the hormones are going and everything. And as I continue to search for my purpose in life, I began to feel depressed, just because I feel like my answers or my questions weren't getting answered, and things like that. And after attending youth group for a while and just developing relationships with some of the other kids there, I began to understand who God was, and what that meant. And I remember our youth pastor laid out what salvation is and who Jesus is. and what he did for us on the cross. And he asked if any one of us wanted to live for Jesus and accept that salvation. And I remember consciously raising my hand and just praying to Jesus. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I was doing, and it all made sense to me in that moment. And all the other spiritual stuff I was doing was just out the window at that point. The way I remember that moment and that day is like the Avengers movie. There's a scene in there where they're all standing there in a circle and they got their backs towards each other, and the camera's spinning around there. And you see in that moment in the movie, it's like, this is it. Like, this is like the climax of the movie. And like that's when like the Avengers assemble and everything. And like the feelings that scene tries to evoke in a person is like literally what that moment, like when I prayed that prayer that day, that's how that felt in my life. And that's how I remember that day going and realizing what our purpose was, or what our purpose is here on earth.
So as a teenager, I began to realize that my home life wasn't normal or acceptable. During this time, my cousin also shared with me that I was adopted, and finding that out later in life really wrecked my sense of self, and just kind of was a continuation of just living in secrecy and finding that secret out so late in life. And around this time, my oldest brother, who was an adult, moved in with us and lived with us off and on, and this would temper at least the physical portion of my dad's outbursts. So I started to really vocalize to my father just that this wasn't normal and really push back, and it really strained our relationship even further. And at the same time, I still remained really active in our church youth group, and this is when I met Crum. And I say his name like that intentionally because at the time I didn't really know him, and the only thing I knew about him was all the youth boys would heckle and yell out, Chris Crum, whenever he walked in the door. And it was really less than thrilling for me at the time. So he and I didn't really talk until we both attended our youth group's mission trip to Sao Paulo, Brazil. And at the time, we had separate buses, and Christopher actually got put on our bus because he wasn't allowed to sit with said youth group boys because they were always playing pranks and were up to antics. So I obviously invited him to sit with me, and because I was so cool at the time, he was really impressed and really thrilled about that. He didn't exactly.
You're still really cool.
He didn't exactly sweep me off my feet. He was a self-proclaimed pirate at the time. And Pirates of the Caribbean was really popular, and he called me exclusively Calypso for the entire trip and tried to release me from my human bond on multiple occasions. So despite all of that, I was drawn to his kindness and his journey to faith that was so different from mine. And after the trip, we became really close friends, and we continued our friendship and eventually started dating.
So I was Commodore Chris, Master and Commander of 7 ships of me own. So we were on that trip when we were teenagers, and as we transitioned into adulthood and we got married, before we got married, we became youth leaders at our church that we had gone to pretty much all growing up. We faced challenges. So at home, several of my family members did not approve of our relationship just because of the color of Jocelyn's skin. And additionally, at church, it was the same thing. So the leaders had kind of changed from when we were younger, and the leaders, some of those leaders began to openly oppose our relationship as well for the same reasons. And I was even approached and told that I could stay involved in the church if me and Jocelyn didn't maintain a relationship anymore.
This rejection deeply hurt me. The church that had been sort of a refuge for me my whole life then turned its back on me, in large part due to the color of my skin. And looking back on it now, I can see that was sort of a catalyst, like for church in general. I'd become really disillusioned with just sort of the double life, and now the church now rejecting me. So in around 2015, we had left that church at that point. we got a postcard in the mail when we were living in Twinsburg with our now 2-year-old daughter, or then 2-year-old daughter, she's 11 now. And we received a postcard from Momentum Church, and its slogan read, "For people who don't like church." And this really resonated with me as I'd grown so disillusioned with the church. And the further message of no perfect people allowed really felt like it was meant for me.
Yeah, so during our search for a new church, when we got that postcard in the mail, I was definitely against going to a church that sends postcards to invite you to the church. But we went and we're here. So, and although it took us time to feel comfortable here, Momentum has helped us heal through a lot of things. And we found a church where we feel like the people and the leadership acknowledge and believe the truths of God. And the phrase "love God and love people" really just speaks to us because that's what most people are searching for.
So God and Momentum has helped us feel or heal from and forgive a lot of the hurt that we experienced. I could say, while I don't have a close relationship with my father, I have found ways to have a relationship with him while maintaining healthy boundaries. And we've also worked to have a healthier relationship with a lot of Christopher's family as well. And I would say this is in large part due to Momentum and the F-Bomb series on forgiveness, which taught us a lot of practical and valuable steps to working through forgiveness with our loved ones. So we just want to thank you, Momentum, for being such a big part of our lives, just really being an extension of our family. Thank you.
Thank you.